Happening now, we're going to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. It is February 28th, 2018, and this is the EdTech Situation Room, episode number 87. And my name is Jason Neiffer. I'm the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school that's located in rainy, snowy, icy Missoula, Montana, where we've been having some bizarre on-again, off-again winter weather here. And joining me, as always, is Dr. Wes Fryer. Wes, how is the weather in your neck of the woods?
We had some snow days last week, and we were back up into the 70s, and who knows if winter will return. It's going to, I think, dip into maybe the 30s or the 40s tonight with a cold front. Your microphone sensitivity may be just a shade bit on the strong side. I don't know if the device you're on allows for that adjustment, so it does sound okay, but if there's a way to touch that down a slight bit. I am the Director of Technology at the Cassidy School. Excited to, as always, get to talk with Jason here on the EdTech Situation Room about the week's recent news and the educational lens through which we generally tend to view such things. No conferences this week for you, I take it, Jason. Back.
No, that's correct. I'm actually going, in fact, I will be presenting, I guess. The NROC Project's member meeting is next week in Monterey, California. So I will be attending that event. And it's a great event every year where I get to talk to a lot of like-minded K-12 and higher education professionals. And I think I've mentioned EdReady Montana, the EdReady project statewide EdReady project in the state of Montana, but NROC is the developer of EdReady. So it's an opportunity to meet with a lot of our colleagues and talk a lot about great ways to use technology to make students be able to access content in an easier and a more accessible way. So, and I guess now I'm thinking about, I am presenting at that conference next week. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to visit friends and colleagues there. So do you have any upcoming events, Wes?
We do have the 6th annual EdCamp OKC, which is going to be on Saturday, March 3rd. And I just was checking. We have 262 registered. And Luckily the snow was in the ice, more than snow, was last week. So we used to be the last Saturday of February and did have some icy and snowy weather come in. So the first weekend in March has been what we have kind of stuck with, but excited for that. And definitely excited for some more STEM discussions. There's a conference I've learned about that's going to be happening locally this summer with the STEM Consortium, and eager to talk with folks about digital citizenship and other assorted topics. So looking forward to that.
Okay. Well, this is the EdTech Situation Room, and we like to take the news from across the technology spectrum and give it kind of an educational twist and take a look through an educational lens. And Wes, where would you like to start this week in the varied stories of the technology world?
I actually like that article that you put in about Facebook talking about facial recognition. So this is coming from Wired Magazine. Now, that's kind of weird. It says February 29th, so it's tomorrow.
Oops.
No, it would have been today. It's not leap year. So it's today. Today's Facebook. And the article is, which, by the way, I listened to a number of these on Pocket as I was being the chauffeur for the family tonight. Nice to be able to listen to your articles, if you don't mind the digitized voice, which I don't. It's talking about how you can turn off these features. I have a quick story. When I was in Ohio a couple weeks ago, I interviewed some students about the Scratch projects they were doing, took a photograph of them, had permission to post this online. When I posted to Facebook, it identified one of the students who I had never met before and did not know with first and last name tagging him. And so I was like, yikes, I think I'll go ahead and delete that tag. So I was thinking about that when I read this article. And what it's suggesting is that people may want to turn it off because it may be creepy, and I haven't found this yet, and I was just trying this in my Facebook, there is something called catfishing, and I learned about this because of Alec Kuros mentioning this, and it's my 8th grader, my 14-year-old knew what it was, that when somebody's trying to pretend to be you using your pictures, and sometimes there are cases of males pretending to be different males and then trying to romantically interact with women and, eventually trying to get them to give them money and feel sorry for them. And in some cases, you're picture can be used, and you can have completely fake, profiles being created about your name. So I actually thought this is a good thing. I'm glad that Facebook is giving us the ability, I guess, to opt in, opt out. It said it used to be based on a tagging feature that you could choose in 2013. Anyway, I have not found, maybe I don't have any pictures that other people, in your activity feed, you can take a look under photos and videos, and it has some other options that appear. Photos you're tagged in. And so that's kind of where I've been hunting for this. And so anyway, I thought that the opportunity to identify on Facebook where photographs it thinks are you are being used, perhaps without your permission, was a good thing. And I wasn't really creeped out. What was your response and reaction to that, Jason?
Well, I'm really of mixed feelings about this. I do think that there is something to the notion that if you have a lot of friends that utilize Facebook with, and obviously there is a certain social component to the photograph process in social media, right? That's the core of it. And if you think back to the early days of the development of something like Facebook, and I'll refer people back to the Accidental Millionaire book I referred to a couple of weeks ago on the starting of Facebook, that it was trying to kind of recreate the social experience of college, right? And what part of that is that you're in big groups that you may or may not necessarily know people from, and you could be, a picture taken of you that you don't even know about, and it would be a good thing to be able to identify, pictures at weddings, pictures at parties, pictures at graduation that you yourself or maybe even a close friend didn't take, but it's a good image that you may want to store and share later. But I do think there is a lot of potential abuse that comes along with that, and for me, I think this is kind of the future of photographs, right? Like, obviously, artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning will make this easier, and in fact, that's already utilized in a lot of existing photo tools. Google Photos utilizes facial recognition so that I can type in, once I identify who my mom is on Google Photos, it can show me every picture of my mom. And so, that's I think there's something interesting there. But man, I don't understand why Facebook decided to go forward with this in light of the fact that the creepy factor is still a big issue with the platform.
Well, I do understand why they're doing it, because as the article points out, Facebook, Twitter, social media platforms, they want us to just share more and more, and they want to normalize that sharing. And so any way they can do that, I mean, I guess I hear what you're saying, that by moving forward with this, it might creep people out and cause more people to say, hey, I'm dumping Facebook. But I think they're trying to change normal. And I think when you look especially at younger demographics, I think the research and the surveys show that kids have less concerns about privacy, selfie culture and all of that. It's more normalized. So they're just wanting us to share more, I think, and to bring those technologies to bear to benefit their platform, which relies upon data and which tries to figure out how to get us to spend more time with our face, being sucked into the screen. The article says that you can go to settings, face recognition, but that is not an option that I have in the web browser version. Now I'll go onto the iPad version here in a minute and try to look for it as well. But anyway, I'm not seeing a facial recognition option. There's an option under privacy. There's an option. There's a privacy option, but anyway, I'm not seeing the facial
and I do have it on my Facebook desktop Facebook version. Although I did receive a notification about a week ago that this technology was rolling out.
So it must be something that they're rolling out to different people. So, Oh, wow, we have a kiss on the show.
Scandalous.
Yes, it is the opening of Hairspray this weekend, the senior musical for our oldest daughter, and I got to see part of it tonight, and mom and daughter just returned home. So, what do you think you're going to do, Jason? Are you going to opt in, opt out? Have you decided?
I'm currently opt in because I want to see this experience. I don't feel like there's a particular threat of me being weirdly identified at stuff. I'm pretty sure. Well, actually, there's an article I want to also talk about here for a second because I think it also relates to this. So there was a really great article in this morning's Washington Post, and it was so engaging that I try not to look at my phone in the morning at all until after I have done morning routines, and that I am either starting to do work at a coffee shop or at work, and ready to rock and roll. But there was a headline this morning that was so engaging to me that I end up reading the article and kind of being a little stunned by it. So the headline is, "We studied thousands of anonymous posts about the Parkland attack and found a conspiracy in the making." And it's an enormously interesting expose if you don't understand the world of 4chan and some of the darker alleys of Reddit. There is a organized movement, and this article talks about this in context of the Parkland high school shootings, but it's not it is about that, but it's not really about that, because there's been a lot of efforts on the part of darker elements of the internet to organize against, I guess, people is the best way to describe it, during times of tragedy, and it seems to have a political bend to it. So we don't really talk about politics on the show. It's not what it's really about. So I want to kind of divorce the politics out of this for a moment. But this article and the context and talking about the concerted effort against victims of that shooting, and how within minutes of the shooting occurring that there were already research efforts related to victims and their parents, and attacking various components of this process, and utilizing pretty aggressive tactics from a social media standpoint in order to terrorize really victims of this terrible tragedy. And the reason why I find that to be something that we need to be cautious about, right? Like, I can think of a really good example of this. I have a dozen teacher friends who are on Facebook under pseudonyms, right? That they got spooked out, in the early days of Facebook, and decided they didn't want kids friending them, finding them, and yet they still wanted to engage in the social experience. So I probably have, it's about a dozen folks that are in the teaching industry that utilize a pseudonym in this process. So I could see an example of, Wes, when you uploaded a photo and someone who you had no social connection with on Facebook was tagged in that photo. Imagine for a moment taking a photo of a teacher who is otherwise anonymous on Facebook, and then suddenly that pseudonym pops up, right? And again, you can turn off this technology, so that's a wise move on Facebook's part. But I think, I don't disagree with this notion that finding ways to connect. I don't find that to be, itself undesirable, but I just think that it's hard to think through the impacts of things when these technologies are first rolled out. And you hear it here almost every week on this podcast, but this is why we need to not bury our heads in the sand and start having real discussions with kids in schools related to technology ethics, and digging a little bit beyond the glamour of some of these incredible technologies.
Well, I'm reminded I have just shared the fourth, maybe sixth, I guess, presentation for parents on digital citizenship in the last month. Last night we had a ice day, so one of them last week got moved. And I happened to mention in this one, before we talked about group chat and bullying, I mentioned Here Comes Everybody, which is one of my favorite books by Clay Shirky. It's a 2008 or 9 text, I think. And he says in some videos that I've watched, he's got TED Talks, summarize the whole book. Group formation just got way easier. All right. So this is a fundamental characteristic of the internet age, is that we can have voice, and not only voice independently, we can have voice together, because we can band together with like-minded folks, whether that's, parents supporting our sports team, or whether it's people that want to promote, an anti-Jewish, conspiracy theory, or anti-Israel, anti-Russia, whatever the case is. And so I truly believe this is an endemic, characteristic and challenge of the internet age. And I think you've talked about this in terms of like we're in a reset cycle or something like that. So yeah, that is a good article, and it's unfortunate. And I've been, listening to some different podcasts. The Ezra Klein podcast has a really good interview. I think I just tweeted that. I was listening to that in the car tonight, talking about outrage and how, many platforms are really fueled by outrage and by the outliers. And this is a challenge that we're going to have to try to work out. He has an interview with Amy Chua, and she's the author of a book called Political Tribes, Group Instinct, and the Fate of Nations. So yeah, this stuff does talk political, it talks societal, but we need to grapple with this. And will AI come to our rescue? I don't know, but we're certainly seeing, Facebook, Google, another article that we can just quickly give a shout out to that's under the same social media heading in the show notes, which, by the way, are at edtechsr.com/links, is from The Verge today. YouTube says new moderators might have mistakenly purged right-wing channels. And so I think we mentioned on the show last week, Facebook has said they're doubling the number of humans that are working on the news feed, and from like 20,000 to 40,000 people. Of course, hopefully those aren't like Mechanical Turk, employees or somebody who's just getting paid, pennies on the link or something. But anyway, YouTube is addressing this as well, and there's human beings that are involved, and they're, flagging stuff. And I think, Jason, it ties to the same kind of 4chan, other, sort of conspiracy theory actors, because it mentions, InfoWars and Alex Jones and, strikes against them, because that was part of this whole hoo-ha that said these kids aren't real, victims, they're crisis actors. Kudos to the students for being so articulate, right? I mean, this is a very powerful example of student voice, and, students that were, in some cases already doing things like broadcast journalism and honing their skills of public speaking, and then suddenly found themselves thrust upon the world stage. So I think we're going to continue to see this sort of thing happen, where the world's attention is focused upon an issue. And I think also it's a cautionary tale, perhaps, on why none of us really want to be in the headlines of the New York Times, right, or the Washington Post or anything else, because if you are thrust there, if your child, your student is, then here come the trolls, because the trolls are, always looking for somebody to attack, unfortunately, and bring down. And, I'm thinking of my own daughter doing her TEDx, and it's nice to be able to share that and have student voice. But at the same time, I think it's kind of nice not to have that even on front pages of our local news media, much less national media, because if we did, then we would probably just invite a lot of potential negative attention.
Right. And I would say that definitely, if you don't understand the risk or some of the really kind of terrible darker forces that exist on these technologies, please read that article. It really is worth your time. And again, it would be in the show notes at our website, edtechsr.com, where we post links to all the stories we're referring to here on the show. But it's worth your time. And I think especially since a lot of these same tools are the ones that are utilized by cyberbullies, definitely educate yourself if you work in the classroom environment. So, okay, I'm going to take us to maybe a nerdier turn. This week is Mobile World Congress, and probably since Wes is a new convert to Android, he probably hadn't paid as close attention to this important international event until this year. But Mobile World Congress is obviously not in the United States. Otherwise, I think you would have heard more about it. I think it's in Barcelona, if my memory serves me correctly. And it is an international conference that focuses on mostly cell phones. And there's a great article, I think it's either today or yesterday at The Verge, that talks about kind of the best stuff that's going on at Mobile World Congress. I just want to talk about a couple of these for a moment and get Wes's opinion on them first. One major trend that a lot of people are talking about is that even moderately priced phones are starting to get rid of screen bezels, which would mean the areas outside the glowing part of your screen, and they've been getting smaller and smaller and smaller, even on cheap devices. But it appears that in the upcoming year, even a lot of the mid-range and low-range Android makers are probably going to get rid of as much screen bezel as they can and make the experience as focused on a glowing screen as possible. And I was thinking about this, and I'm currently using an LG V20 phone that I bought used a couple of months ago. That's been a great phone for me. But it does have a small top and bottom bezel, but it's otherwise pretty much screen to screen. The case here complicates that just a little bit, but that's something that's heading to the direction. So now, Wes, that you are an Android dude for the time being, do you find that the bezel-less environment is to your liking?
Well, I'm still on the $146 phone, so I'm eyeing these phones and thinking about how nice they look. They're talking about the same form factor, but yet more screen. I don't remember what the exact dimensions are, but on one of those phones, it was talking about what instead a 5.5 inch screen size, and now it's a 6.2 inch screen. So with my eyes aging as they are, and I don't have my bifocals yet, I've got to go get my prescription. I'm really interested in that. I don't want the clown shoe phone. I don't think I want the huge thing, but this, increasing by a few centimeters, a bit is really welcome. So I'm definitely looking at that with care. It was unfortunate to see how much they kind of abused the word AI in their marketing for. What was that? Was that Asus that did that with their phone? I think it was. And maybe that was another article that I had looked up about that. I think it was the Zenfone 5. And those are, who are those by? Yeah, it's by Asus. So they were kind of saying, hey, it's all AI. Everything's AI. And then, we're broadly defining AI. Well, not every feature that you have here is AI. But the other thing that really stood out in that article were Chromebooks, right? Because we had new Chromebooks announced. Asus has announced these, and I am very interested, potentially in having an upgraded phone, but I'm really interested in the touch technology and the bet that Microsoft and other Chromebook manufacturers are making on combining the laptop, with a convertible yoga style device, especially with a better, touch stylus experience. And so Eric Kurtz had recommended I think it's an Asus Spin 11 Chromebook because it had this better stylus. And so the ones that Lenovo announced as well, not the low end one, but the middle and the upper range one, which is just a $350 device, evidently has a much better stylus. So, Jason, are you ready to shop for more Chromebooks and iPhones, especially for the notch? Because that article talks about the notch copiers, even though they don't have the iPhone 10's face recognition and all of that, but it has the notch. So, are you itching for an Android notch phone?
No. First, related to the Chromebooks, I do think that it is really exciting that there's more form factors coming out for Chromebooks, and the one that everyone's talking about with the Lenovo Chromebooks and the Asus Chromebooks is there are flip Chromebooks that seem to be realistically compact tablets as well that focus on pen input. And we haven't talked a ton about digital inking here on the podcast, but it's definitely a movement that's catching fire. I feel like the Microsoft OneNote crowd is help pushing that, certainly in a more broad stream direction. But I think if the Chrome environment can start bringing more of that functionality into classroom Chromebooks, and both Lenovo and Asus's Chromebooks both together are doing some pretty interesting things there. Robust, well-built, relatively inexpensive, decent hardware Chromebooks, I think is the right direction. When it comes to the phone notch, that's one of the things that's always kind of weird about the Mobile World Congress every year is that you do get a handful of B and C tier Android manufacturers that are trying to, copy the big things of 2017. What I think is interesting about that is that it appears to me that that iPhone is getting copied, or iPhone X is getting copied. And honestly, I don't know a lot of love for that device. It's expensive. A lot of people don't like the notch. It's very un-Apple. It doesn't really matter that much to me, but it is interesting that Asus in particular released a phone, and there were a couple of C and D range manufacturers that also released those as well. One other trend that was dominant in Mobile World Congress that I still don't know what I think about is that a number of other phone manufacturers announced phones that ditched the headphone port. And the one that was most talked about were Sony's and Nokia's Android phone releases that didn't have a microphone port on it. But I've never had to deal with that at this point because all my phones do. But I like Bluetooth. Bluetooth has gotten better since Apple did get rid of the headphone jack. I feel like the standard and even the cheaper Bluetooth devices seem a little more consistent than before, but I'm not a huge fan yet, at least. So are you looking forward to the day where it's Bluetooth only, Wes?
No, I think that is a great legacy device, and there's a universality to that, right? And just as there has been for the USB port in terms of compatibility. And so, no, I'm not looking forward to that. But I do want to defend the iPhone a little bit. Peggy's still in shock that I'm, an Android phone user at this point. And hey, there's nothing to say we can't, switch back and forth, but. The iPhone 10, Apple had record sales, and while they announced, and we talked about the article a couple of weeks ago, reducing the amount of orders from I think 40 million to 20 million with their chip manufacturer that may have just been chips for the phone, which they manufacture their own chips, but anyway, they were cutting down because of the increase in price, and it is really popular. I know folks, I have family members that have it, that love it, the quality of the camera. Just the overall quality of the phone. So I think that we probably hear the negatives amplified a lot in the tech news media. We talk about how much people like to gripe about Apple, and they're top of the heap in terms of revenue and in terms of overall market share. Though they're not, are they, Jason? Doesn't the Android phone worldwide dwarf Apple? Do you have any idea what is that statistic?
I don't know what the statistic is, but it's I think it's by multitudes now, and part of that is there's just no low cost option in the Apple family. I mean, there are a lot of iPhones in use in places that can't traditionally afford amongst the average population but they're oftentimes very dated, very used devices. For example, I read this was somewhere on Hacker News a couple weeks ago. I should have actually posted this article about that. There are a lot of iPhone 3 and 3Gs that are still in use in the developing world and there's a great aftermarket parts market for that because they're iPhones. I mean, the OS now is not supported anymore. Apple, in some cases, has stopped signing certificates, which means you have to do workarounds to get access to apps. But it's a reality because people want Apple devices. I mean, they've got a cachet that's unparalleled in anywhere else in electronics. So yeah, I think it's interesting too. And I will say that. I'm not in the market for an iPhone at this particular point, but every time I pick up my wife's, it's always the battery life is great on it. It is a very smooth interface, and I will still always like iOS as a great operating system.
I just dropped another article related to this, which is that 5G is starting to roll out. And so this is from TechCrunch yesterday. These will be the first cities getting 5G from Sprint and T-Mobile. And I think one of the things to remind ourselves, and this relates to this big investment, right? If you're putting this $1,000 investment in this phone, how ready are you to turn that over in 2 or 3 years? And, there's a number of people that are on those plans that let them switch out. And, I guess people do that with cars and leases and things like that too. But of all the phones being sold in 2018, none of them are compatible with 5G wireless. I was telling our 14-year-old today, I was asking her if she knew about 5G. And I said, a DVD movie right now is about 2.5 to 3 gigs. It's pretty big. And that'll take a while, like maybe 20 or 30 minutes to download off of 4G LTE. And what they're saying, and I think we've talked about this on the show, is that that'll download in 2 to 3 seconds over 5G. So we continue to talk about phones and, what we're going to, what we want, what we're going to do, and what we invest in. I do think that practically speaking, we need to consider our refresh, on a family, just like at school. We talk about, are we on a 5-year refresh? Are we thinking about Chromebooks on a 3-year refresh? We all need to think about our refresh because, not only will you reach a point at which the software will not support your hardware, but, when it comes to connectivity like that, I mean, heck, I am definitely going to want a 5G compatible, phone when the 5G service comes to Oklahoma City. So
absolutely. Well, and I would be in that market too, and I'm going to go ahead and guess that our proclivity west right now for cheaper Android devices are going to be a far cry for getting those updates. So that is a reason to go with a more premium phone. So a lot of other interesting little things out of Mobile World Congress. The other one that I want to mention, just because it's kind of funny, is that Nokia, which is not Nokia actually. Nokia is a brand name that is been licensed out to a number of other companies. The one that made a splash at Mobile World Congress is HMD Global, which owns a license to release things in the Nokia brand. And they released I guess I don't even know how to describe it. It is an old school phone with modern guts in it. And it's the Nokia 8110. It's less than $100. It has 25 days of battery life. Which is pretty interesting. And although it runs a custom operating system, it does have Google Maps, the Google Assistant, Twitter, Facebook, Snake, for those of you that remember that from the good old days, and an LTE connection. So if you're looking for an old school phone or, want to get rid of the distraction of your cell phone, although for some bizarre reason, it would still have Facebook. So I guess you could keep up on that addiction as much, but that could be an interesting alternative for you too if you're done with super smartphones.
I'll do a quick article, and this is a shout out to Peggy George, who's in our chat room tonight and actually had mentioned this article last week. This is from The Verge on February 16th. Embedding a tweet could be copyright infringement, says a new court ruling. And goodness gracious, surely this is going to be rejected. EFF calls, Forrest's decision rested on 2 blockbuster tech industry lawsuits. One was the 2007 case Perfect 10 versus Amazon, where a court ruled that Google search could show full-size copyrighted images as long as it was simply hot linking them from other sites. This established something called the server test, which protects sites that display copyrighted content stored on someone else's server. The EFF calls the server test, quote, a foundation of the modern internet. It provides clear guidelines for liability and means sites can't be punished for content that's beyond their control. I don't know if we had the article last week, but there's something that Google's actually just changed in terms of images and the ways that they're, not having those separate, trying to hurt that a little bit. So anyway, hopefully that is not going to prevail. I'm kind of, and this will be for U.S. law. We're seeing, back to that Facebook thing, different laws in different countries playing out where, there are stricter rules on the collection of biometric information, for instance, in Europe. And so, and even here in the United States, we mentioned on the show several weeks ago how this Google app for the art, right, that you can take these selfies, and Google will, it's a Google Arts and Culture app, and they'll tell you what, art you look the best as, or you look the most like. And it's kind of funny and fun, but you can't do that in Texas. And I think maybe Michigan as well, because of the laws on biometrics. I had to install Tunnel Bear and, VPN as if I was in New York City. And then I could use the Google Arts and Culture app because I happened to be in Texas at that time and it was banned. So anyway, those kinds of things are certainly not great for the internet, which was built on the idea of interoperability, and it doesn't matter where you are, packets are treated in a neutral way, which actually, Jason, might be a segue to the net neutrality article. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah. So the Senate has taken up net neutrality. And what is interesting about this that I think will be different than when the FCC ruled on net neutrality is that I think you're going to get a lot more industry arguments based on whether or not it's a good idea to utilize net neutrality rules or not. And something that's really interesting is that now 2 states, Montana and I want to say Vermont, maybe it was Maine, has also taken up the mantle of net neutrality. Montana, you may remember, Montana's governor Steve Bullock announced that no Montana state funds would go to a telecom company that didn't utilize net neutrality rules. And one of the states taken us up on that, and I think that's a great movement in that direction. But now that the Senate is doing it, that's going to obviously cause that debate to be a little more open and wide. And so we have just a few short months of debate on this, and it seems like there is a ticking clock right now on whether or not there will actually be legislation related to this. The Senate, is supposed to be a deliberative body. That's the role. The rules are very forced into that, which means that it's not necessarily easy to get something in an open debate on the floor of the Senate, and so this could very well die in committees. But there's the debate starting now, and that means you should, if you are a net neutrality advocate, or you're against net neutrality for whatever reason that Wes and I would like to talk you out of. But if you are concerned about this issue, now is the time to contact your senator to see if you can get them to think in that direction. I will tell you that Montana's 2 senators are on opposite sides of this issue. One of our senators is a clear proponent of net neutrality, and when I contacted the other senator, which I contacted both in December about this issue, the other one said that they supported the actions of the FCC to eliminate the rules more for innovation purposes, of which I think is not a great argument. So keep an eye on that, and if it ends up being something that's a little more formal than wrangling about debate, then please contact your representatives and let them know what you think.
And it is going to be a long fight, and it may end up waiting until an administration changes and the majority in Congress changes, unfortunately, because with the majority that Republicans have and the way that this tends to line up along partisan lines, and the fact that our chief executive would be likely to veto it, even if it did pass. It's close in the Senate, but it probably is not going to get through the House, and even if it does, it's not going to get by the president. Yet the fight needs to go on. So,
yep, you're here.
Advocacy there. Hey, I'd like to come to, if we could, down to the security topic, and not maybe the best source in the world that we've heard of, Big Law Business from February 20th. But this is an article, Cybersecurity Enforcers Wake Up to Unauthorized Computer Access Via Credential Stuffing. And we've talked about this before, but I hadn't heard of this term credential stuffing before. And what this is, it says upwards of 80% of people are estimated to reuse credentials across at least some of their online accounts. And so this means if you have that favorite password and you've used it forever and you've used it lots of places, once the Target hack happens, the Equifax hack, whatever kind of breach that actually gets your email address and your password, then other folks can grab it and use that immediately. They write programs and algorithms that go out there and test these things. So on that same note, Engadget from February 23rd has the article that 1Password now lets you see if your password has been leaked. And that is based on the website we've talked about before, I Have Been Pawned, which is a really good one to visit. Put in just your email address, and it'll tell you how many known breaches your email address is in, and whether they've actually obtained your password and other kinds of information. So, Jason, where are you with credential stuffing? And do you feel it part of your digital moral imperative to encourage others in your life to use unique passwords with a password manager?
I think I've eliminated the vast majority of credential stuffing on myself, right? So I think I'm using unique passwords, but the only way I've really been able to do that is by utilizing a password manager. And my preferred password manager is LastPass. And I now have 3 separate LastPass accounts, one for my personal accounts, one for my work accounts, and one for a small business I run that I also maintain a Google and Facebook presence on. So for me, it's the challenge, I think, is, there have been a couple of times where, like, for example, for me, it's not just using unique passwords. I use randomly generated 20-character passwords. I go to a password generator. They're impossible to remember. even if I wanted to. But I feel like, especially for school, right, the work I do as part of my day job at the Montana Digital Academy, that's the minimum I should do to make sure I don't get hacked. And so, I'm in a good direction there. But I'll be honest, I don't know a lot of others that are, and I'm kind of surprised that schools are not being more proactive about this. And I know, Wes, to compliments to you, I know you've been working with your staff at your institution to institute two-factor authentication. An interesting tidbit related to that is that I visited the Montana State Education Office. It's our Office of Public Instruction. I was working with the state AP Gifted and Talented and AP coordinator, and I noticed that the state of Montana is now forcing RSA encryption with it's a USB key that you have to have in addition to your password, which means that that's a serious amount of security at that point, and having that physical component that you need to be able to do that. And that's, I think that's wise direction for one and all. So are you doing anything beyond a password manager, Wes? Have you considered anything like a physical key?
I've used a physical key. We have one of our teachers actually who doesn't have a smartphone or televisions at home, and we needed to have an option for him, and so it was about $12. Bought him a key, and so I've tried a couple different ones. Actually, the one I was using the most is so cheap, and it finally fell off of my keychain, and so I haven't bought another one. But it's nice that you can have multiple forms of verification. I will say, though, T-Mobile, and I had another technology director in Oklahoma actually message me after I was in Ohio and did a presentation about privacy, security, and mentioned two-factor. There had been a Reddit thread about T-Mobile customers falling prey to hackers who were using information supposedly from the Equifax attack in terms of getting their socials as well as email, and then being able to get access to their accounts. There was also an article, we don't have it in the show notes, about some kind of hack that was giving people access to anyone's T-Mobile account, which has been taken care of. Anyway, I was waiting for T-Mobile to formally come out with information about this, and they did, and they messaged all users, and what they recommended is that you called in and set up, I thought it was going to be a separate PIN. It just seemed like it was a new PIN that we set up. And actually, now that I think about it, I better make sure I wrote that down and put that in our 1Password. Because I can remember how I came across that number. I think it was a 6-digit number. But yeah, the danger there was that people, if you were using your phone, back to what you're talking about with Montana state government and why they might be doing the actual RSA, USB key instead of saying use your phone, is that it is possible, and these kind of things have been documented, where people call up your cellular provider, they know your number, and if they can convince that person to reset your SIM card, then they can hijack your number and then gain access to everything that you have on two-factor. So folks who are wanting to be very conservative about that are recommending people do not use the phone, that they use other means. At this point, we're still, fine with folks using their phone. That is a risk, but we feel like it is, much better to be using two-factor with your phone than not using any two-factor at all. But it probably is something, Jason, that I should think about, sharing a session at our state EdTech conference and talking about, because I definitely, agree 100% that this is the future, and it's something that needs to become the new normal for passwords.
Yes.
And so we are going to continue working towards the goal of single sign-on in as many sites as we can, using those Google credentials, not only to make things easier for faculty, but also to allow for the two-factor element. Because if we're single sign-on with Google, we talked in some depth a long time ago, I think, about OAuth and perhaps some vulnerabilities that exist there when you're using that multi-site authentication. But anyway, we are going to hopefully continue to walk down that road, and we do need to encourage others to as well.
Yep, absolutely so. Okay, let's see. What else should we talk about? And then we can let's talk a little bit about Chromebooks. we mentioned most of these stories in context of the Mobile World Congress, but I do want to note a couple of things related to Chrome OS that's also related to Android. And so Lenovo and Asus, excuse me, are both releasing new Chromebooks. There's a lot of interesting bits about that. But something else happened that's related to Android. We've mentioned Project Fuchsia here on the program. That is Google's new operating system that they're working on, and it's kind of hard to tell what it is because it works on a Pixelbook. It also works apparently on a Nexus phone, but apparently the Boy Genius report, which today reported on February 28th, that there's kind of a quiet movement happening to kind of move away from Android as a primary operating system, and instead it appears that Fuchsia might be the future for Google. And so Boy Genius talks about the fact that Fuchsia is something that Google is very much developing and in development. They also released something at Mobile World Congress called Flutter, which is a product that allows coders to code apps in Flutter that work apparently seamlessly both on iPhones and Android devices, but the language itself or the platform itself is fairly native to both operating systems, which means you don't get the funk sometimes of joint development can create, and that apparently is something that's also very closely related to Fuchsia. And it seems to me that it may be that Google is going to try to start over again here, in part because they are running into some practical problems now. We're 10 plus years, well, almost 10 years into the Android experiment. Android's the most popular operating system on Earth for mobile devices, and yet there are very clear issues with Android. And so I point you to the other article I found this week, which is from 9 to 5 Google, and I think it was today when they reported on this, but they took a comprehensive look at security updates, and it turns out really only 2 manufacturers are doing even a kind of good job at rolling out Android security updates. One of them is Google, right? And that's who Google develops for first, right, is Google release phones. And the other one is the Essential phone. The Essential phone was made by the guy that created Android, right? So we have a bunch of Android nerds.
That's like the black phone or something, right? Isn't it like super expensive to
Yeah, well, it was super expensive. You can now pick one up for $499. And let me be clear, I've been very tempted to purchase the Essential phone. It looks beautiful, and they keep rolling out these great updates to make the hardware even better. But even manufacturers that had one point or another been famous for quickly releasing updates, it's terrible. And the vast majority of Android phones don't have an update to the vulnerabilities that were announced at the turn of the year in January, for example. And even primary or decent phones. This LG V20 is considered to be a pretty big phone for LG, and I'm still one version back on Android. And although I recently received a security update on this phone, it only took me to December 2017. So there's something going on here. I think the fact that either Google can't deal with things like the fragmentation issue on Android or won't deal with it, tells me that maybe they're just going to start over again, right? Like they're going to develop an operating system from the start that works both on laptop-like devices and mobile devices, and it's built from the ground up to be really security conscious. So, I love Android. I think Android's a great architecture. I love, utilizing an Android phone. I feel like it gives me a lot of options as an end user, but maybe this is the only way to do it. Just move on completely to something else.
Well, I'm excited about it because of the Microsoft experience, right? Look how security vulnerability plagued most organizations are today because of the legacy of Windows and because of how difficult and hard it has been, and it still is, to get enterprise IT to let their clutches go of, the Windows architecture. And there are so many bugs, and, Microsoft has attempted and continues, I think, to walk down that road of how they can keep their existing users, but bring out a more modern and secure operating system experience. As an IT director, to talk about the educational lens, this is one of the biggest draws of the Chrome environment, is that it is a reboot, and we're not building it on top of Windows, and we're not building it on top of Mac OS. I mean, I don't know how many folks out there remember Mac OS 9, 8, 7. I think I might have started my Mac life maybe with some OS 6 still going on, but OS 7 was, or Mac OS 7 was really when I got into the internet with, modems and TCP IP and all that great stuff.
Sure.
I think it's very exciting for Google to be looking like that, and what a responsibility they have too, right? As the shepherd, creator, and gatekeeper of the world's most popular mobile operating system, that's a tremendous responsibility when it comes to security. So I'm glad to see them doing this, and I think we also need to keep in mind when it comes to Internet of Things, we need to pay attention to companies and products that are experienced with security. Peggy mentioned in the chat, and I heard this morning on NPR as well, on my Google Home morning briefing, that Amazon has just purchased this Ring doorbell company. And, probably what the NPR report said is that they're going to keep their name, but further integrate them into the Miss A, I won't say her name, universe. And so anyway, hopefully Amazon is going to take just as much as Google is the whole idea of security seriously. And we're going to have some ways that companies are encouraged to bake good, secure operating systems, into their devices, into the Internet of Things. And that has to mean updates that are not, oh gosh, someday maybe I'll download a firmware update and update my router. No, the router needs to be updated. And at some point there needs to be a push, not just a pull to that. So I think you should go for the essential phones, Jason, and you should give us a full report here in a few weeks. If you're looking for that authorization from the wife, tell her that. Your partner in EdTech news is not sending you a check, but has given you the firm, go ahead.
Right. Wes has green lighted the essential phone. So what else should we pick up on, Wes, before we hit the Geeks of the Week?
All right. Let's see. There was an article you put in from The Verge about Microsoft's Slack competitor might get a free version soon. This is February 27th. And, I have not made the jump into Slack. This is for Microsoft Teams. And I think it is an important element of a lot of products that there's a free tier, right, to be able to try them. I've been using different project management software tools, and Asana was something I've played with for over a year. Now I'm into Trello, and I might become a Trello, paying customer, because the way in which we're able to manage these projects with milestones and to-do lists and all that stuff is pretty awesome. So is this going to entice you to embrace Microsoft Teams? And what is your history with Slack, Jason? Have you used it? Do you use it?
I have used it in context of an experiment inside the office because I thought it might be something that we could get into at the Digital Academy. And honestly, it never took off. And we've tried Trello and it never took off. I tried Trello personally. It never took off. And part of the reason why is that I am pretty infamous. I carry around a notebook. It's a composition notebook, like the 99-cent composition notebook you buy at Staples. And about 6 months ago, I did go on Etsy and buy a nice cover for it so that it looks a little more professional in meetings, as opposed to, my ratty notebook that I would dig out with, a bunch of binder clips and paper clips and rubber bands around it. But I very much prefer a paper to-do list. But I will say I have used Microsoft Teams in context of projects I work on with the Northwest Council for Computer Education, which is a Microsoft shop, and it's pretty good. I mean, it allows that team, which is I'm a very small part of, but there's a number of remote workers there that work together on pieces, and I do think that it's a good product, and it also is a critical part of Microsoft's classroom environment. Microsoft Classroom is being either depreciated or is depreciated, and Teams is going to replace that. So Teams and Teams and OneNote will work together in context of, kind of the Microsoft classroom environment. And interestingly enough, I didn't put an article in today because I couldn't spot one that was really what I was talking about. I received an email today saying, I think it's Hangouts Chat is Google's competitor for these kind of chat channel programs. And it is now available to us in our Google Suite for Education account. And I think it's rolling out widely across enterprises and across G Suite for Education accounts. So we'll try that and see if that's the magic sauce for us. But I think it's good. And I think you're right, Wes. Having a free tier on that particular kind of tool, I think is pretty important.
All right. Well, shall we Geek of the Week it?
Sure. I have a couple quick ones here. The first one is that Google announced earlier this week, and I had an opportunity to play around with this. The article is actually from the Google blog. Maybe it was just today. But they're offering now a free online class called a Machine Learning Crash Course, or the MLCC. And there's been a lot of press about this in the last day or so, and I think it's worth your time. I only spent about 20 minutes with it this morning. I was so impressed with the early part of it, at least, that I will probably, once I'm done with my current big project in my life, which is my doctoral dissertation, maybe take a look at going through this a MOOC style course very seriously. And so that's something for your consideration. And then I may have mentioned this before, but if I didn't, it's a really interesting development. I was talking with a friend of mine today that just bought a used premium Chromebook. It's the HP Chromebook G1, HP Chromebook 13 G1. It's one of those metal MacBook Air-like devices from HP that has a lot of RAM and a nice fast mobile chip in it. And one of the things I told him was that something that I had discovered a couple of months ago is that if you like a nice big trackpad and you are a Mac user and have a lot of the older style Apple Magic Pads sitting around, the ones that use two AA batteries, those work just fine with Chromebooks. And in fact, it reads the multi-touch, which means you get all of the advanced Chromebook multi-touch gestures. So that means using 4 fingers to swipe up to get the expose view. You can switch back and forth with tabs with 2 fingers. It's a really great experience. And for some reason that I can't begin to describe, there are drivers for that device in Chrome OS, and it reads that as a multi-touch device. It just pairs up via Bluetooth, and you're good to go. So if you happen to have one of those sitting around, or it's an old box, or if you're an IT person, you have a couple of those sitting around that have been long abandoned for the newer, bigger versions of that, you can also buy them for absolute dirt cheap. Used on eBay, then those work great with Chromebooks. So consider that as a device you could carry around with you to add more mobile functionality to your Chromebook.
Wow, that's awesome. Mine is quick. It's an actual add-on for Google. It is called Orange Slice Teacher Rubric. Remember, an add-on is a little different than an extension. Extensions appear up there on your Omnibar or next to the Omnibar. An add-on is going to be visible inside your Google Doc after you install it from the menu bar. But what this allows you to do is to really quickly assess rubrics that you create yourself for student projects. And so I shared this with our computer science teacher, and he was interested, and we kind of watched part of a video that Eric Kurtz, shout out to Eric, because he had talked about this in a workshop I attended of his in Ohio. And just, using rubrics and being able to have a way to quickly assess them is pretty awesome. So there's some other tools that are more canned, but this one just, you have to make the rubric. But as long as you have in the upper left corner rubric categories, then it is going to allow you to quickly score that and put that at the bottom of, you have to copy and paste your rubric into the bottom of the Google Doc. But then you invoke this, and it allows you to quickly, highlight and select the scores on the different rows and columns of your rubric, and then at the top it'll go ahead and put the grade, and you can decide whether it's holistic or whatever else they call it. 2 different ways to display it. And anyway, pretty cool. And these kinds of tools for Google are just phenomenal. And so I would love to know if anybody ends up using that. And of course, we would love any feedback that anybody has who is listening to the show. Welcome to always join us live, but we have more folks tuning in to us via our recorded archives. So let us know if any of these Geeks of the Week end up making it into your actual life and workflow.
Okay, Wes, where can people find you on the vastness of the internet?
I am W. Fryer on Twitter. Speedofcreativity.org is the blog, and I am continuing to work on our digital citizenship website for school, which is digcit.us. How about you, Jason?
I am at Tech Savvy Teach on Twitter. I blog a bit at the NCC Tech Savvy Teacher blog, blog.ncc.org. And I would actually also like to announce something that was just announced yesterday. Montana Digital Academy is part of the Virtual School Leadership Alliance, which is a group of over a dozen state virtual schools that work together on curriculum and advocacy related to online learning. And we announced a partnership yesterday. VLLA will be joining up with Quality Matters, which is an organization on the East Coast that works on development of good quality online courses. And we are engaging in a project where we are taking over the standards from the INACOL, which is the K-12 online learning advocacy group. We are taking over online course teaching and learning standards, and we will rewrite those standards together and carry on that project from INACOL. And so if you're interested more about that, virtuallearningalliance.org is the VLLA's website. You can find them on Twitter at VLLA Online. I happen to have something to do with that Twitter account, and we'll be announcing in coming days more about those initiatives. But this action here is not the VLLA. This is the EdTech Situation Room. We are a podcast that broadcasts once a week from the cozy confines of Missoula, Montana, Oklahoma City. You can join us at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Central Time, or 3 a.m. UTC. We are live via YouTube. You can go to edtechsr.com and get to that live link every week. We love to have people join us, join the chat room. If you become a regular, we'd love to invite you on the show sometime to talk tech with us. Or you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. We're in most podcast directory. In fact, it's getting to the point where even new apps that I try out for podcasts have a podcast directory that contain this podcast. Or you can go to our website and download a tiny little digital copy of the audio each and every week. So please join us in future weeks. We encourage you to stay safe out there on the internet. And good morning, good day, good evening, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.